Good morning and good afternoon for those of you that have already had lunch. This is a European event, so the lunchtime is different in different countries. We are here for the webinar Responsible Research and Innovation, a Checkup, which is part of the Marie Curie Alumni Association EuroScientist 2008 webinar series. We have been carrying out webinars since, I would say, a couple of years ago on a very broad range of subjects. And the subject of this webinar is something that is, it has become somehow a buzzword in European science, the concept of responsible research and innovation. This concept has been around now for quite some time, and the objective of the webinar is a checkup in the sense that we really want to check whether it has been applied, whether the applications are exceptions, or it is really becoming a paradigm change, and also to give an idea of how it can be applied to the researchers that are joining us. I am told that we have over 80 people attending the webinar. By now, this number fluctuates. They usually become a little bigger, then a little bit larger, smaller, etc. But we are a good bunch of people. And we have also a great team of speakers. I will introduce them shortly. Rosina Malagrida, which is part of the RRI Tools project. Anne Loeber, the associate professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Amsterdam, a member of the NewHoRRIzon project. And Gerrit Rauws, director of the King Baudouin Foundation. The event will be structured as follows. There will be a short round of 5 minutes interventions by each one of the speakers. Then there will be a moderated debate, and you will be able to send through the chat system of the webinar your questions, and I will pose them to the speakers. So before starting, let me just mention an information that comes from the Marie Curie Alumni Association. The association is carrying out a survey on refugees and academia, which, by the way, was a subject of one of the first webinars we carried out. And now the organization will share a link with you in order for you to participate in this survey if you want. So let us start the first interventions with Rosina Malagrida. She has a degree in chemistry from the University of Barcelona. She's also Master in Science Communication from the Imperial College in London and head of the Living Lab for Health at IrsiCaixa. She was previously the Director of Research and Society at Barcelona Science Park. So, Rosina, the stage is yours for your first 5-minute intervention. Remember to turn on your mic.
Hello everybody. Glad to be sharing this webinar with you. I will start by defining, as Michele asked me to do, what is RRI for me. For me, responsible research and innovation is the necessary movement to put the research and innovation system at the service of a transformative change of our model of civilization that brings better solutions to our societal challenges we are facing today. If we imagine a responsible research and innovation system, for example, in the year 2030, to set up a future, a vision, I would vision that our system would be a bit different than now. We would have transformative networks created which continuously analyze research and innovation priorities and strategies with the participation of different stakeholders. And when we talk about participation of different stakeholders, we don't mean only researchers and citizens, but also industries, civil society organization, the education community, and policymakers. We imagine a scenario where more time is devoted to collectively think about alternatives to the problem definition and to the priorities before we start to think about concrete projects. I also vision a scenario where we co-execute the projects with the participation of these multi-stakeholder platforms. And once we get the results, because we have all these co-creation and co-definition processes, we also start to see how the European paradox where we see that the amount of innovation that we are managing to produce is smaller than in other regions in the world, we can see how the transfer of technology and of knowledge is more effective, because we have the different stakeholders of the value chain already engaged in the process very upstream. I also envision a situation where research evaluation no longer focuses only on high impact factor publications, but other outcomes and outputs of research are also valued. And finally, I vision a Europe where in different regions there are networks of fab labs, living labs, and different structures that facilitate these co-creation and networking activities. Then responding to your question on why is it necessary, well, there are, I guess, as a summary, I could mention three reasons why responsible research is necessary. The first one is for normative reasons, because we need to move out of this technocratic model of governance towards a more democratic model. The second reason would be instrumental, to move out of the European paradox, to have more legitimacy and more private investment in research. And finally, for substantive reasons, so to have a better research and innovation that better covers and met needs that we can identify by doing this sort of multi-stakeholder engagement, with least waste research and with better solutions for our complex and persistent problems that we are facing today, and therefore more adapted to the needs and expectations of our citizens. How am I involved with all this? Well, basically, as you said, I'm the head of the Living Lab for Health. We lead initiatives that promote deliberation processes where different stakeholders can participate in research and innovation processes and in research and innovation decision-making. We also offer training and advice to universities, research centers, innovation agencies, and governments on how to implement RRI. And we are currently engaged in different European funded projects on RRI, such as Inspires and Enrich. Within Inspires currently, for example, we are working on a research agenda and implementing some projects covering unmet needs on HIV prevention. And these projects focus on the creation of science shops. We can talk about science shops later during the debate if that's of interest to the audience. And then I'm also engaged in other projects like, for example, Fit for Food, which is about doing a system transformation of the food research and innovation system. And also other projects like CRISH, which is about training on RRI and patient experience. And in the past, I was deputy coordinator of the RRI tools together with Gerrit here in the table. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rosina. You have anticipated the three main questions that I proposed you to deal with in the 5 minutes intervention. That is, what is RRI for you, why it is necessary, and how are you professionally involved in it? So before giving the word to Gerrit Rauws, I would like to tell you that we are now 140 attendees. As I told you, the number fluctuates a lot, and we are a good bunch of public now attending the webinar. So Gerrit Rauws is the director of the King Baudouin Foundation, and he's part of committees and governing boards at several institutions like the European Fund for the Balkans, the Fund for Scientific Research in Flanders, the Foundation for the Promotion of Biodiversity Research in Africa, and the European Policy Center. And he has been, between 1993 and 1999, the deputy chair of the Regional Development Commission of the Brussels Capital Region. So, Gerrit Rauws, you have 5 minutes to deal with these issues. What is your vision of RRI? Why is it necessary? And how you are related to it?
Okay, good afternoon. I already had lunch, so for us it's afternoon. Thank you for having me on this panel. What is RRI to me? I prefer a very simple sort of idea of it. RRI is research and innovation, or are research and innovation processes that really foster interaction with society, and by doing so stimulates the accountability of the research and innovation system to society. In order to do so, it has to take into account several things. It has to apply the highest ethical standards. It has to be in touch with societal values and preferences, and it has to involve stakeholders in the research and innovation process. What I liked a lot about the RRI Tools project, where Rosina already made reference to, is that they defined collectively 4 process dimensions. And why I like that, because RRI for me is essentially has a lot to do with what, it's strange to use the word in a research context, but sort of the corporate culture of an institution. It's not about tick boxing, it's really about how are we doing research. And those 4 process characteristics are diversity and inclusion. So try to involve in the design, the execution, and the follow-up of your research as many different perspectives as possible. It can be other researchers, it can be businesses, civil society organizations, and citizens. It's about anticipation and reflection. Are we, from the start of any research project, thinking about the consequences for not only for your institution, but especially also for society? The third one is openness and transparency, which is obviously strongly related to the accountability question, and where all the open science, open data discussion comes in. Where are we very clear and transparent on what we are doing and why we are doing it, and so also communicating on it. And the last one is responsiveness. If societal actors influence, give new perspectives to the research, are we willing and able to modify our research or innovation process? So I think I like a lot these 4, even when they sound a little bit theoretical. I think in practice it's easy to make them applicable. What is the importance of RRI, or why is it important? I think for me, and obviously the three justifications or arguments Rosina gave are all valid. For me, better research and better science is really the essential one. I strongly believe that by including different perspectives, we are stretched as a researcher. We have an overview of all available knowledge and insights. And so for me, the best reason to do RRI is that it might lead to better research. The second one is the, let's say, the accountability reason. Whatever our funding, or in whatever funding scheme we are, public funding, private funding, no sector in society can live and function on its own. And the more we interact with society, the more support we will get from society, and the more our research outcomes would be taken into account, for instance, in policy making, and the more we will be respected as a research community. So for me, these are really the two key arguments. And yeah, what is my involvement? We've been at the King Baudouin Foundation active in deliberative processes on the interface of research and society for a very long time. We did some at Belgium level on genetic testing, for instance. We are doing now a new one on next generation genome sequencing and things like that. And we did also a couple at European level. It's already 10 years ago that in 9 countries we did a European transnational debate on the future of brain research. That's sort of the first way I'm involved in this topic. The second one is I have been involved, I'm not currently in a couple of European projects, the RRI tools being the most recently one, and also a foundation initiative among different European foundations, looking for concrete examples. That was the European Foundation Awards for Responsible Research and Innovation. And then at the foundation I'm in charge for the health research program, where we try to apply the principles of RRI as a funder. And one of the things we've been doing is to try to generate research agendas on specific health questions involving all stakeholders. Pharmaceutical companies, citizens, patient organizations, clinicians and other caregivers. So that's the way we try to walk the talk at the foundation.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. So by now, I think everybody should have a clear idea that RRI is not just something that you add at the end of your project. You do business as usual and then you add an RRI layer. It's really something that should be there, or that is meant to be there, at least in the intention from the beginning. So let us give the stage to our third speaker, Anne Loeber, Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science at the University of Amsterdam. She has a PhD in Political Science that was awarded the second prize in the 2005 Annual Political Science Award competition of the Dutch Political Science Association. Her research explores the relation between knowledge, public policy, and governance in issues like climate change, sustainable development, agriculture, and medical technology. And she's part of the NewHoRRIzon project, a European Union-founded project that is set to investigate and stimulate the integration of RRI in the European and national research and innovation practices and in funding. So, Anne, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on board in this webinar, which I think is really wonderful to have a webinar on this topic, because I think, as Gerrit and Rosina already said, that RI is really something relevant to take on board in thinking about science and in thinking and doing research. And when you ask us to think about what RI means, I think RI is a timely occasion to rethink the research and innovation system as such, as well as the funding of research and innovation. Because in order to meet societal challenges and to be responsive to societal needs and to be able to be held accountable as researchers, as scientists as we are, I think we have to find ways to open up our science system for public scrutiny, for engaging public, and you might say democratizing science as such. And even whether one is in public funding or in private funding, whether it's about academia or it's about research innovation in industrial context, I think in order to meet the challenges of our time, we are inclined to be more reflexive about what it is we're doing. And so I think RI basically captures various incentives and dynamics that are heading towards that goal already. So I would think of RI as a movement more than as a concept, and as a label that unites people who are self-aware as researchers, as scientists, and are trying to find ways to act responsively in whatever it is they're doing in the professional business. So why I think RI is necessary, I think it gives momentum to this kind of dynamics, which we observe are present quite extensively throughout all sorts of research and innovation practices. And it helps by making this into a label, and by having that label endorsed, for instance, by the European Commission, very fundamentally, it helps those who are active in this perspective to pursue this goal of self-reflexiveness and public accountability. And how am I involved? I'm a part of a consortium, as you already mentioned. It's called NewHoRRIzon. It is one of those RI-oriented European Commission projects. And this NewHoRRIzon project, we try to investigate the extent to which RI is already in place in all research funded through the 9 program lines of Horizon 2020. And we are, while doing that, seeking to stimulate its integration in research and development. And so we approach the topic in a learning by doing perspective, inviting those involved in one of the program lines of a Horizon 2020 to jointly elaborate and explore options and possibilities for integrating the ROI notion in their own professional practice. And to that end, we design so-called social labs. And the reason why I'm here, part of this webinar, is that we are busy organizing this social lab for MCAA, for Marie Curie grantees and others involved, home organizations, funding agencies, etc., who are involved in research and innovation via Marie Curie.
Great, thanks a lot, Anne. We are now 150 stable attendees, so we are growing, and which is a clear signal. I mean, we had this signal from the beginning when we started to propose this subject that there is a great deal of interest in RRI, and questions are already starting to stream in. But before going to the public's question, I only have one question from my side to each one of you. After the introduction, I would like to ask you somehow to land these on specific examples. So I would like to ask you to briefly tell me, each one of you, one specific example in which this concept has really been applied to something practical, concrete in science. We don't have a lot of time, like 1 minute each or so. So maybe, Anne, do you already want to start, you?
Okay, I've been thinking about examples, and I think there are quite many one can think of, but I want to mention one particular example, which is the work done by the Research Council of Norway, which has started off recently a flagship program on biotechnology, which is called Digital Life Norway, which is really a major program. I think it's about 40 million for the first 4 years, or first 3 years. And they have made RI a cornerstone of the entire program. So the program is divided in various projects. I think it's about 12 projects on biotechnology, blue biotechnology, red biotechnology, green biotechnology, etc. And part of each of those projects, the RI notion is at its basis. So being responsible, being responsive to societal needs, thinking about how to give RI hands and feet in actual practice, in laboratory work and actual research. And in addition to that, among those 12 projects, there is one that is entirely set to designing and stimulating RI practices in those other projects. So helping researchers doing lab work, doing field work, etc., in the ways they can make RI really fully operational within their work. And that program is called Res Publica. So the notion of making what might be considered a private issue or something that you only deal with in your lab, in your own research, as something that needs public scrutiny and political judgment, as something that people can refer to, relate to, and then including wider audience, wider publics than the mere peer reviews that are usually part of research work.
So the Norwegian example is a first place where those of you that are interested in starting to work in these fields or in looking at developed example can look at. Maybe Gerrit, since you have seen so many examples in your award, is there any example that you would like to highlight, one specific that is especially significant or especially an especially relevant example of how can RRI be implemented?
Yeah, indeed, there is one I would like to use as an illustration. In these awards, we had more than, I don't remember exactly, but more than 100 applications from all over Europe. So meaning that it really is a movement. And the one I would like to present is Mistra Urban Futures from Göteborg in Sweden, because it's a research institute which is set up as a 10 years research program. And all research they do on sustainability in an urban context are done in what you could say an RRI way. So all projects are co-created between practitioners, citizens, and researchers. The design is done together. Practitioners and policymakers are in a permanent dialogue with the researchers on while the research projects are in progress. And they invest also enormously in engagement, two-way engagement, and have a person who is in charge as an engagement officer or engagement manager even within the institution. And it's on a wide variety of topics, and it's always transdisciplinary, which for me is always, or in many cases, an element of RRI. So it's business, it's law, it's sociology, it's biology, it's engineering sciences, it's design, it's ecology, all working together on mobility, food, equity, and fairness in urban context. So it's really within in their DNA, and I think from that perspective, it's still a rather unique organization.
Great. So we are seeing examples really drawn from very different areas of science, from biotechnology to urbanism. Now, Rosina, would you like to add one other example that people could refer to have an idea of how this can be implemented in practice?
Yeah, sure. I would like to share one example I like a lot from the UK, where, as you may know, there is the James Lind Alliance, which is a structure that constantly is doing priority setting partnerships between patients, clinicians, and researchers, and they explore 15 priorities for research in different challenges, in different health challenges. And when this journal did an analysis of all the results that this James Lind Alliance platform had come out, they saw that in most of the results, for example, the trials that were sponsored by companies were mostly focusing on drugs and vaccines and so on. Whereas when they gave priorities within these partnerships, they could see that drugs and vaccines were a priority, but that there were other priorities that were unmet. And these other priorities were related with devices and diagnostic tools, for example, and also with education, training, service delivery, psychological aspects, physical exercise, and so on. So we could see that there were some needs that were not being covered in most of the trials that were sponsored by industry. And then the journal realized that their editorial policy was very much responding to the same agenda as these commercial trials. So they realized that they needed to change their editorial policy, and what they decided was to engage patients in the decision-making bodies of the journal, and to start having these patients also in the peer review activities of the journal. And well, if you enter into the website, you can read about the experiences of the first patients who started doing these peer review exercises and how they reported back to the scientists who were sending the articles, and how this is slowly changing a little bit the way research and innovation is being presented to this journal.
Great, thanks, Rosina. By the way, now I will start to ask questions by the public. When you have time, I mean, when you're not answering the questions, it would be great if you could write in the chat the names of the projects so that we could share them with the public, the name of these 3 specific examples, each one, the one she or she has talked about. Okay, so let us start with the first question. A person mentions that there is a precedent, the concept of corporate social responsibility, which was pushed strong by the European Union a few years ago and then simply dropped. So the person is asking whether, I mean, what is the future of RRI? Is there a real commitment by the European Commission to invest in RRI in the long term, or is it something that will be restricted to Horizon 2020 and then it will be dropped and substituted by something else in the next framework program, as it happened, according to this person, to corporate social responsibility? Anybody can just, maybe now you can turn on your mics and just pop in when you think you want to comment. Anne?
Yeah, if I may, of course, I'm not part of the European Commission working on this, but the way we have been discussing this with members of the European Commission and those involved in preparing FP9, our impression is that as a concept, in my view, it is here to stay. For 2 reasons. One reason is that the European Commission is really dedicated to this notion, which I think also in their perspective builds on previous notions like ELSA, and includes key issues that have been explored before in previous programs, which are now called and taken together in terms of the 6 P's, the 3 O's, among them gender equality, the public engagement, and science education and the like. Now, indeed, all mentioning of these in terms of RI often doesn't include a reference to corporate social responsibility, but I would say that the notion of CSR is based first and foremost in dynamics within the industrial sector, and is met with those keys that I just mentioned on the part of the EEC as a funding organization. So that is one reason why I think, and what we can say about how it will continue, it will be, to my knowledge, be part of the FP9 framework, so the next framework which will succeed Horizon 2020. It's there in the fundamental organization of the program, and of course the work programs and the calls that will be issued in the context of that framework, they are bound to be oriented towards RI.
Okay.
To including RI notions in the funding scheme, in the evaluation criteria for funding research.
Yes, thanks, Anne. So you have given us an important news, that is that apparently RRI is to survive in the next framework program. So unless there is any other remarks from the other speaker, I would go to the following question. Any remark?
I would maybe just add one thing. I mean, I admire a lot the role the Commission has been playing towards RRI. It seems on a good way for FP9, but there's still a lot of mainstreaming of RRI in the funding programs of the Commission itself to do. But it's very important that RRI in the future would not be too or solely linked to the European Commission and European funding programs. I mean, the more academic institutions, funding bodies all over, let's limit ourselves to Europe, are involved in it, the better it will be. And even if the acronym and the definition might change or even be left behind in the future, I fully agree that it's the underlying principles and the underlying ideas will certainly survive.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I can come up just with a comment, Michele, I have a friend of mine who told me recently a metaphor that I like a lot, which is that we are a bit like in the medieval ages. In the medieval ages, there was a very small portion of the population who could write and read, and we had a very huge portion of population who couldn't. And now we are at the same point with research and innovation. We have a very small proportion of our population who can make research and innovation, and we have a large portion of population receiving the products, the services, and so on from research and innovation. And therefore, we need to transform this situation. And I think whenever people are hearing about RRI, they are getting convinced. And even if they don't call it RRI, because there are other movements coming up with different names, and it doesn't matter. But what it's clear is that we need to move out of this medieval situation in terms of research and innovation.
Wow, this is by far the most striking metaphor on RRI that I've ever heard, but it's really, I mean, it's inspiring, absolutely. And it also conveys the whole impact of the concept, which is not, as I mentioned, something, I mean, it's really a game changer. Okay.
That's one of the reasons also why Carlos Moevas, for example, because you were asking about the European Commission, he's now very concerned about how to set up structures in Europe to facilitate this process, to make sure that all this part of the population can participate somehow in this research and innovation. And one of his latest documents is this one titled Fab Lab App, where we can see that once he puts in between the labs and the apps, the applications, he puts something else in between, which is the fabs. And the fabs are these fab labs or these structures where we need to start meeting more and reflecting more about what we are doing and where we are leading to.
Okay. One question on a key issue, whether this RRI concept is somehow harming the autonomy of science. So do you not fear that having to motivate everything in research lead to pursuing mostly short-term goals? Historically, many impactful discoveries came from blue sky research. How would you reply to this criticism? That is, the fact that too much link with societal needs may end up providing less innovation, in fact.
If I may, there is a certain risk that some organizations or funding bodies would take a very utilitarian, if I may say so, approach to RRI, even with the best intentions. Obviously, it's in certain areas, it's clear that if you are working directly to find answers to what they then call the global challenges or big societal processes, it's easier to see the RRI approach. But I think that there is no contradiction whatsoever between blue sky research and the academic freedom and long-term thinking and RRI. I think it is always very interesting to reach out, to interact with people who has different knowledge and information than you have. It's always good to think, to anticipate on what are the potential consequences of my research. So there are many of the process characteristics, not to talk about the ethical values or gender issues and obvious things that are important for every research. And so there might be different degrees to which RRI is a guiding principle for a specific research, but I'm strongly against the fact that it shouldn't be relevant for everybody, or that it's in opposition with academic freedom. Even if you're deciding yourself on your research topic and the way you're doing, there's a lot you can learn and benefit from interaction with others.
Any other remark on this issue, RRI versus academic freedom?
I think I would like to use the opportunity to underscore what Gerrit just said, that I think it is a false dichotomy to think about societal relevance on the one hand and RI, and on the other hand blue sky research. I think the autonomy of research is not at all an issue, nor is there a focus, and if there is, we want to steer away from that on merely, say, producing applicable science or something. It's all about opening up whatever it is you're doing for a scrutiny, and it doesn't have to even include direct involvement of all sorts of actors all the time, but it is about this notion of representative thinking, about becoming aware of what one does, even if it's fundamental blue sky research, how it will have meaning and might have implications for others, and how others in society may have to look upon it. And then that kind of reflexive science is really what is at stake. So I think it's a mistake to take it as something as a technical issue and merely as a tool or a label used by funding, although I think public funding of research can serve as a lever to...
Okay, yeah. So a lot of questions are streaming in. One other question is whether, I interpret it, I mean, research is expensive, money is needed, but is not science kidnapped by big companies' interest? Isn't not capitalism too much implemented in science nowadays? I interpret that the question is, given that the agenda of science is so much influenced by private corporations or whatever, how can we imagine this democratization? Any remark? We have many questions, so I ask you to go to the spot.
Yeah, that question is very good. And I think the question is, whose agenda are we responding to? So I guess in this paradigm of responsible research and innovation, we will start seeing more papers or more dedication to analyze the needs of the different stakeholders, and therefore whose agenda we are responding to. This is a very relevant question.
You mean science is already responding to agenda and academic freedom is already somehow influenced or restricted by several stakeholders? It's a matter of enlarging the spectrum of stakeholders.
Exactly. Research is already responding to values, but who are deciding these values? Who are deciding the priorities of the research we are doing now? And then if we explore that, and we explore that there are other needs that perhaps we are not considering, then we put them on the table, as the example of the British Medical Journal, and maybe we realize that we are having unmet needs that we are not covering, and that perhaps we need to change our priorities.
Okay. Another person is asking about examples of responsible research and innovation in humanities. For example, translation studies, history, languages. Does anything come to your mind? And while you think about it, I will ask another question, whether RRI could create a new type of profession. For example, a mediator between scientists and society and politician, and would it be more functional if it is integrated in the scientist responsibilities? So I repeat the questions: an example of RRI in humanities, and whether specialized professionals are needed to implement RRI, or is it something that scientists themselves have to carry out as one of the tools they need to develop? Whoever wants can just pop in.
If you want, I can answer the one on whether we need the specialists or we need the scientists to take the lead on this. And I think it's both, definitely. I think we need scientists on their own changing the mind on the way they perform their research, and therefore the groups themselves should become these fab labs that Carlos Moevas mentions in this document. So these already open structures where in these research groups, a lot of people come in and reflect together, anticipate, and so on. But we also, I guess, we also need specialized structures, and we can see that happening a lot in the technological sector. For example, with this Fab Labs movement, when it started about 10 years ago, they created a network, and now the network has more than 1,000 Fab Labs in the world. So this shows that the creation of structures is a need. And we are seeing, for example, this structure I mentioned in the UK, and there are many others in Europe in different fields. So I think it's both. We need both because there are different levels where we need to act at institutional level, at project level, but also at complex and system level. So we will need these different structures helping this operationalization at the different levels.
Okay. Any other remark on RRI in humanities and whether we need specialized professionals?
In the humanities, there is this, and broader than the humanities, there is this movement which has origins, to my knowledge, in the Netherlands, which is called Science in Transition. I don't know if the protagonists of this movement themselves use the label RI, but then I would call it RI. As I said, I think RI is a label that gives momentum to kind of a lot of dynamics that are directing towards this idea of reflexive science. And I think Science in Transition is such a movement which originates in humanities. And as for other examples, I could refer everybody to the website of our project, which is NewHoRRIzon.eu, because in our project, we try to cover all program lines. We will cover all program lines in the Horizon 2020. So that will definitely include all sorts of research, including humanities and social science and natural sciences.
Maybe just an example, I mean, or not a very concrete example from history, but it's clear that especially if you do research on relatively recent historical periods, the colonial history of Western Europe is a good example. If you do research in that area, think on what would it mean if you do this in an RRI approach, in formulating your research questions, in involving different stakeholders. So it definitely is possible in the humanities. It's from time to time needs somewhat more creativity. But I don't have the concrete example. I've been reading archaeology studies who tried really to use RRI, the RRI framework to communicate their outcomes. So there's probably more work to do in humanities to make it very concrete, since yes, it comes from engineering and ecology, but it's as relevant in certainly social sciences and humanities as in the other areas.
So one of the attendants was asking about the urban regeneration program. I think Gerrit already shared the name, and the team will share it in the public chat, so that this architect can connect with them, and maybe he can address directly Gerrit to have more contacts in the future. So now a key question, that is it is hard to shift towards RRI if university evaluation system does not change, as one of the panelists underlined. Is there anything the European Commission is doing in this direction? So a key issue, how is RRI implemented in evaluation, whether it is being implemented, and how it should or could be implemented? Anybody wants to comment?
Yeah, well, there are different approaches to evaluation, but I think there is not a consensus yet on how to evaluate, but there are wide debates on, as I mentioned in my introduction before, on the need to change the way research is being evaluated, definitely. And today I came up with a report from the University of Leiden, where they have an assessment methodology for research projects, and they have a table, which is interesting. I can put it in the chat now, to evaluate, for example, a PhD thesis regarding its social impact. So we are starting to see some tools and some interesting modes of evaluation, and things are starting to change in different environments. But of course, there's, for example, the Declaration on Research Assessment that started in 2012 in San Francisco, where you can Google it and you can subscribe to it as well. And it's a strong movement as well, trying to do advocacy for this change.
Okay.
There is a lot to do now still.
Any remark?
I would like to emphasize that in our NewHoRRIzon project, we also have an evaluation which is explicitly based on and directed towards producing what's called narratives. So the idea is that RI has so many meanings to so many people that if you want to understand how it can be implemented, you want to do justice to the specific context in which it is being developed and employed. And in order to bring that out, the evaluation is a narrative evaluation. So it brings out stories and storylines about implementing RI, conceptualizing RI in particular context.
Okay.
I just want to underline the importance of this question. I think for me, the rewarding system and the evaluation system, the current one, is the most important obstacle to RRI by now. Even if as an individual researcher or a research group, you are highly interested and motivated in RRI, all these factors for the time being are playing against you. Now, at each level, obviously, of the level of an institution, a university, of national funding bodies, etc., one can do something about it. We try at the King Baudouin Foundation for our grant-making programs to, in the selection criteria, to integrate some of the RRI principles. But it's a major issue, and it's and therefore I think the question was also very relevant. It would be important to tackle this, not by legislation because they don't have the competences, but to tackle it at least at European level, because it has a lot to do with competition among research institutions. So it's a key issue.
Yeah, this is in fact, I mean, the issue of evaluation always comes up in our webinars. I think the set of incentives that have been posed to scientists really is being required. Is under strong criticism from many sides. So in fact, there are two questions that are said somehow, but they are very realistic and they are related to that. So how would you respond to senior scientists saying things as follows? One, we are only in knowledge production business, not RRI values. That is a different field. And two, participation processes take time, and sometimes publications, PhD and research finds don't allow you to have the time to do this. So it's none of our business, and anyway, we don't have time to do it. How would you reply? I'm sure many young scientists have faced this sort of answers.
Well, if I could answer, I think the two of them are closely intertwined, because indeed the basic issue is that even if one is well-meaning and trying to become responsible, responsive, etc., one is only a researcher embedded in a larger institutional setting, and if that setting does not move along, then you don't have the room for maneuver, and you are indeed bound to be curtailed by those kind of concerns. And of course, then emphasis is just on publication, etc. So what RI really is about, and I think that's why I think funding is a lever, but one of the levers only, to ensure a kind of institutional and system change, which is really necessary to allow individual researchers to explore a responsibility and responsiveness. And so another thing is that indeed participatory new ways of including notions of participation or public engagement or representative thinking in one's work without first and foremost having to organize these grand social events or something. There are many ways, and I would like to use this opportunity to call on people to really step forward and share their ideas in opening up science. That can be in many ways.
Okay.
I agree with what has been said. I think one of the first steps which you can, in many cases, are allowed to do, even in a not RRI-friendly environment, is to involving conversations with researchers from the same university or same research institute, but another discipline. That is something everybody will accept. And I'm still surprised that we're 2018 by now, people applying the same methods, but in different faculties or in different disciplines, don't know each other, don't exchange knowledge. And so RRI starts within the own university or within the own research institution. And that's sort of first step, I think, towards a more integrated approach.
I would like to add as well that in these questions, what we see is that these senior researchers are coming up with obstacles to start a change, which is quite normal because we have been doing research for a very long time now, as we are doing now. We have seen some changes of paradigm in the history of science, of course, but now we are facing another one, and it's not easy. So what I suggest is that perhaps an idea is that if you, the person who is asking this question, if you're in a research center, for example, you can take profit of one journal club or one seminar that is organized and ask everybody to bring with post-its obstacles, but also opportunities to move in this direction. And when we put them on the wall and we cluster them, we can see that, as you are saying in these questions, time is one of the obstacles we are facing, and it's an important one, of course. Also, the funding is another one. But when we see on the wall that there are many opportunities as well, it's a way of all having the same vision and sharing that we see that it's worth starting to walk the talk in this direction.
Okay, so we have 4 minutes left, so I will ask you 2 remaining questions. There is also a follow-up question on humanities, but I will leave it to later in case we have time. So one question is referring to something Rosina mentioned, that is whether should doctoral training be transformed according to project objectives? Is there anything like a responsive doctorate or a responsible doctorate supervision? And the other question is spelled as follows: how do you see operationalization of RRI in governance? So I think I can translate it is how should the governance of institutes change to help the implementation of RRI? Or as sometimes I say, how can we expect scientists to hear the opinion of a broad range of, say, stakeholders if they don't even hear their PhD students? So, okay, 2 questions. Let's say a responsible PhD, is there anything like this? And how does RRI reflect into institutions' governance? Please, we have 2 minutes left.
Okay, well, first the issue of making it operational in governance terms. On various levels this is being done. So I mentioned the example of the Norwegian Research Council. On EU level, for now, the European Commission works with those what's called 6 keys, which is a way of operationalizing RRI, including, I'd say, gender equality and open science and all that, is a part of assessment criteria for research proposals. But it is not only that, and it's merely a starting point. And I think the very challenge is to see how it can be made operational in various practices. And so for researchers working now, say on a Marie Curie grantee, one is kindly invited really wholeheartedly to come and share your experiences and ideas exactly on this point in our social lab on RRI in the Marie Curie context. So that is really important. I think one of the issues that already came to the front is the notion that impact and as well as excellence in science can be redefined to include far more than mere the number of peer review articles one has in ISI journals.
Okay, additional remarks on RRI, PhD, and institutional governance and RRI by the 2 other speakers, and then we will close.
Well, very short. I think on governance, university boards can do a lot in the way they position the university, in the way they manage the university. So there are some examples. You can go to a sort of RRI process at university level. That's an important one. And for me, doctoral schools are the ideal place to learn and practice RRI. So for me, it should be always a part of doctoral training, just like research integrity and other issues. So for me, it's crucial to start there. It is more about a culture of doing research, as Anna said before, then it's about methods in a certain way.
Okay. Rosina, your concluding remarks?
Yeah, I would say that I've heard interesting examples, like, for example, in a health research institute in Barcelona, that they were considering the idea of creating a board to assess research projects. So not only PhD students, but research projects, like you have a scientific committee, having an RRI committee that assesses projects in terms of responsibility and openness with different stakeholders in it. Then other operationalization examples are the creation of community advisory boards, industry advisory boards, and even mixed advisory boards, where we start to see more ongoing meetings, not only at a certain point on time. Then, as Gerrit was mentioning, doctoral schools also including all these competencies, but not only at doctoral level, but I think we need to start with the very little ones already, 3 years old already, when they do experiments, thinking about the impact of whatever they are doing and the consequences and so on. So at all levels. And then also another way of operationalization is, as we said before, this creation of these fab labs, living labs, or these sort of structures that help to create these transformation networks that make advocacy for RRI, that help the different actors to together give priorities and together build strategies to solve complex and persistent problems.
Thanks a lot. So we are over time. The people that have remaining questions, I encourage them to contact the speakers. I'm sure they will help as much as they can. Thanks again to the speakers. Thanks to the organizers, the Marie Curie Alumni Association and EuroScientist. I remind you that the series continues. The next webinar, we don't have a date yet, but we have a subject, which is a very strong one. It's sexual harassment in science. I remind you the survey on refugees and academia at the Marie Curie Alumni Association, and I thank you all again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.